I want to talk about Wi-Fi and how we got to it, and a few other things. Story starts in about 1989. I started working for a phone company in Alberta in Canada, and they asked me to help them change from first G to 2G, 1G to 2G. 1G never came into Egypt. It was analog telephones, and 2G was digital telephones. And it was very lucky for me because in all these things, in all great stories, there is always luck. So timing was everything. So we got to study all the technologies that are related to the 2G, and came up with two inventions simultaneously. One was to improve the performance. So we corrected what's called the irreducible bit error rate. Irreducible means it cannot be reduced, but we actually reduced it. And we did that, but it didn't work very well on real telephones. And the reason for it was that the telephone itself introduces more errors, or back then introduced more errors than the channel did. So correcting the channel errors didn't improve the telephone's communications very much. So we switched to thinking, is there a better technology than the 6 that were available back then? GSM, of course, was the best contender, and it eventually won the day. CDMA was not as good, but Qualcomm pushed very hard for it, and it eventually made it. When I say we, I had a partner, another Egyptian friend of mine, Dr. Michel Fattouche. And Michel is the best researcher I've ever met in my life. He is very, very thorough in his work. So when we failed with our first patent, he told me, I have a new technology that will fix all these problems. And I was working for a phone company, and they told me, you guys keep coming up with new inventions related to products, and that's not good. So I told him I can't do that. I can't work on it. He kept after me for 6 months and eventually threatened me, as our friendship is on the line. If you don't come to my office and listen to what I have to say, I will not be your friend anymore. So I went to his office and listened, and he explained to me a technology called OFDM. OFDM is the basis for Wi-Fi and 4G. So I listened, and I liked what I heard. OFDM was basically the concept of giving a single user more than one frequency at the same time. So normally you give someone there is a radio station 98.2, then the next one is 98.4. The communications only uses 50 kilohertz, but you leave 200 kilohertz in case the radios move around and go on top. The crystals move around and the signals overlap. So by giving someone the 2 channels, you immediately get 4 times the data rate, but it actually goes to up to 10 times because of other considerations. So I looked at what he did, and I said, well, it's great, but it does not use some of the things that we had invented before. And the second thing was, in very fast communications, the synchronization of the information takes time. The conventionally, what's called carrier and clock recovery took a lot of time. So I proposed that we do things to eliminate those 2 elements of communications. And sure enough, we did, and we registered it. That was we invented it in 1991 and registered it in 1992 as a patent. It went very fast. We got a first office approval. Normally, with patents, the first office action tells you for section 35C, whatever, your proposal is, or your application is denied, and they give you few reasons why it's denied. We were very surprised. This was our 3rd patent. The first action came and said, if you remove the first 7 claims, we'll give you the next 31 claims. We looked at what he gave us and said, that's great. That's a very good patent. We phoned him and said, we just need to modify the claim 8 now. And he said, okay. And we got our patent. That was in 1990, end of 1993, beginnings of 1994. We learned at that time that the IEEE had started working on the 802.11 standard, which was 1 megabit. I have to say, I mean, we went to a number of venture capitalists, and I almost got kicked out of their offices. You know, they said everybody's talking about 1 megabit and 2 megabits, and you're here talking about 40 megabits. Who needs 40 megabits? You know, and it was impossible to raise money for it. And we had to do it from friends and family, and I was lucky. I mean, at the end of the day, when we went public, I owned 40% of the company, and Michel owned 40% of the company. So it turned out to be good for us eventually. And so I say in 1993, we phoned IEEE, and I talked to Vic Hayes, and he told me they're working on 1 megabit. So I said, you know, we're working on 40. He said, that's quite futuristic for us, so we'll meet one day. And sure enough, we built our product in 1994. We had our first OFDM units, that, very much like the Wi-Fi that's used. And we started calling companies to come and see the demos. And eventually Philips came, and I believe National Semiconductors came. And they came and were very impressed. And one of the things we didn't know, that even though others started working with OFDM, they didn't know how to build radios. The radio was very hard to build. And for us, for some reason, it was easy. We had, you know, good engineers, and we were working on it longer. So they asked us about a few tricks, and we showed them. I remember one meeting with Apple, and there was another sort of luck thing in it. The day before we filed our patent, I told Michel that we need encryption in it. And he said, no, we don't. This is a new technology. We don't need to encrypt it. And I said, no, we have to add encryption. And I phoned the lawyer, and behind Michel's back, I added encryption. And about 6 months later, I asked someone to repeat all Michel's simulations. And you know, he told me it doesn't work. There are, out of all the possible frames of data, there is about 10 frames that will never make it across OFDM. And I said, yeah, I heard about that, something called the peak to average problem. And you know, I called Michel and said, you know, it doesn't work. There's 6 frames that don't go through. And he said, oh no, come and we compared notes. Eventually we discovered he does the encryption. And the encryption is what saved the day. So we didn't get that in our first patent, so we filed a second patent with the same priority of the first patent, and included the encryption in it. That complex encryption is what makes 3G works. So we got credit for the complex randomization of 3G, which is what makes 3G as fast as it is. And eventually we worked, like the 4G is called WiMAX. The WiMAX forum was charted by 5 members. I controlled 3 of them: WLAN, Ensemble, and the OFDM forum. There were 3 members out of the 5 of the first WiMAX forum, and de facto I was the chairman of the WiMAX forum. And all the standard that's called the 802.16d or 2004, we basically wrote. So the 4G standard is entirely written by the company WLAN. By about 1998, the IEEE had started working on a high-speed standard, and I got a phone call saying that, you know, your patent was mentioned in the IEEE, and you've got to come to a meeting and tell us if you'll allow others to use your patent or not. And we had to think about it, because till that day we were thinking it's going to be our technology and our technology alone. But we realized that there is a good licensing opportunity here. So I went to the meeting, and they asked me what we will do with the patent, and I said we will license it on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. And we filed those documents with IEEE, and it became a standard. 2004, I believe, is when the first big sales happened in 802.11g. That was Broadcom, I believe, was leading the charge there. If Intel got into it later, I have to say, I mean, it was hard to get any royalties out of these companies. And when we first approached them, we were very reasonable. We were asking for something like $15 million each or something like that. And that was actually very little for this kind of technology. A company like Qualcomm charges, you know, billions. They didn't respond, and Intel literally told me, the only way you will get a response from us is in court. I said, okay, we'll arrange that. So In about 2006, in end of 2006, we transformed the company from a product company to a licensing company. We basically sold all our product divisions to companies and hired 22 lawyers in one go and sued 25 companies and received over $700 million in settlements. So alhamdulillah, we did very, very good for ourselves. The one case that's remaining is with Apple. When we sued the 25 companies, 4 companies carried the burden of the 700 million, I believe, for all of them. That was Intel, Broadcom, Atheros, and another company. They said we'll indemnify everybody. But you know, to get them out of court, they had to pay us some money. Every company paid us some money so that they don't say later, you know, there was no reason for us to sue them. They can sue us for suing them. So basically, everybody paid except Apple. Apple said, no, we don't plan to sue you, so, you know, we don't want to pay. And we settled, okay, we don't pay. The settlement, the first one, covered everything, all our patents. But when Apple started, I think it was in the end of 2011, they introduced the 3G iPhone, and they didn't know, we didn't know, they sold over, I think, 20 million or something like that in the life of the patent. It was the very last 6 months or year of the patent, but you know, it's built up to about 280 million in damages. So, you know, for $2 million that they could have paid, they, you know, left it wide open for a much bigger lawsuit. And that's really the story there. We did very good, I believe. Very proud of what we did in the sense of, you know, 2 Egyptians. We really studied together. Michel and I are friends from school, and we're sadly Zamalek fans, so we never had good luck. But you know, we basically got our luck in technology. In about 2008, I retired. I had started a company to commercialize patents in Canada, but came to visit Egypt in 2008, and on the way back stayed in London for 2 months and then came back to Egypt and never went back to Canada since. I don't know why, I just got tired. And I was basically retired and enjoying my life when in about March this year, I got a call from Michel that he had a fight with another friend of mine, and they have a very good technology, but because of the fight, they cannot commercialize it. And they asked me if I would commercialize it for them. And basically, it's a Wi-Fi technology that's called high mesh. Basically, it's a Wi-Fi router that will be able to listen to other Wi-Fi routers and talk to them. So basically, it spreads Wi-Fi signal from one area to another in a hopping manner. So when you talk to communications company, it's a bit of a holy grail in wireless communications. It is going to lower the cost of communications appreciably. 3G costs about 10 units per gigabyte. 4G will cost about 4 units. This new technology is half a unit. So it's going to reduce the cost of communications appreciably. Now, sadly for you, you're not going to get that saving. The phone company will. But, you know, inshallah, companies like Google and others are pushing with these kinds of technology to push prices down. And inshallah, they'll come down. But basically, with this technology, I decided, well, time to get out of retirement. And, I took back the concept of commercializing patents.